Is President Trump backing off on regime change in Iran? He now says the war will be over very soon. The U.S. bombing campaign is ahead of schedule. What's likely to happen next once the U.S. bombing campaign ends? Joining us is Gregg, Executive Director of Middle East Forum. Gregg, what do you make of President Trump's comments that the bombing will end very soon? Has he backed off on regime change?
I don't think he's backed off on regime change. And when he says he wants to follow a Delcy Rodriguez model in Iran, sort of like how he did with Venezuela, you have to look at it in terms of the different political architecture of both Iran, its very vibrant opposition both in and outside the country, and the options that the Islamic Republic has moving forward. He was asked directly yesterday about the possibility of recognizing Mojtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader, and he said, no, we're not going to go with that guy, but we have other people in mind. And in fact, if you go back all the way to 2009, 2019, 2022, and 2025, at the onset of four major uprisings against the government, there are leaders from those movements who are still in Iran right now, who may have worked for the government under Khatami back in the 1990s, individuals like Mousavi, who were involved in the Green Movement, who's been under house arrest for the past 17 years. And in fact, there is a wide coalition of Iranian oppositionists who have been asking for pluralism to be the new way in which the government operates, 17 of whom are outside the country and 17 of whom are in the country. So there's many options that the president has to work with, and he set some pretty clear conditions for how he sees himself moving forward. One, releasing all political prisoners. Two, making sure there's a transition path away from the Islamist architecture of the government. And three, a complete ceasefire and giving up their proxies, nuclear program, and missiles. If he's able to achieve that, I think it's a win.
Well, what do you think precipitated his change of heart? It seems like it came after his, quote, business-like phone conversation with Russian President Putin.
I don't think it has anything to do with President Putin per se. I mean, we have seen President Putin's failure to try to commit and make options for President Trump to be able to have policy wins ever since President Trump's first day back in office. There was the meeting that took place in Alaska. There were the efforts to try to mediate over the Ukraine conflict. There was the attempt to renegotiate a nuclear arms control treaty. There was many different things that President Trump has asked President Putin to deliver on. He has been unable to do so, so I don't really think that Putin has much sway or influence over the president.
How about the price of oil and gasoline? Prices have skyrocketed globally. Trump warned that Iran that it would be hit 20 times harder if they take action to close the Strait of Hormuz. So what do you see happening there?
So when President Trump made the announcement, also again this week, that he would be trying to not just wrap this up, but find a way to keep the Iranians boxed in by pledging American naval assistance to help transit the Straits of Hormuz, oil went from around $112, $113 a barrel all the way back down to $90. That was with a presidential statement that took place over the course of 2 or 3 minutes. So I think that if the president has the opportunity to operationalize and execute his commitment, then we may see traffic go through the straits again. Frankly, at the end of the day, he also made the point that I think a lot of other people have to understand that it doesn't really affect the American energy consumer that much. It more so affects the Chinese. It affects Europe. It affects others. Like 94% of Chinese oil comes from Kharg Island. And now there's serious consideration in the White House and in the defense establishment to try to take over that oil terminal that's Iran's lifeline for foreign currency and their only ability to really bring in serious money to the regime. So if the president quite literally controls the spigot, he's able to ameliorate the threat in the Straits of Hormuz. I think that'll take care of the oil issue.
Yeah, that would squeeze the Iranians, too, politically quite a bit, economically and politically. Let's say, Gregg, that the president and Israel end the bombing, say, within the next week. The regime with the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, in power would survive. So what would his leadership then mean if he stayed in power? What would that mean for the future of Iran?
Well, I think that there has to be a sincere commitment on behalf of the Iranian government, in whatever form that it takes, that they will no longer allow those three things that were the reason why the U.S. and Israel went to war in the first place. No nukes, no missiles, and no support for proxy organizations. But President Trump also defined relief for the Iranian people as one of the reasons in which we went to this war. Not just because it was a humanitarian intervention a la Kosovo or Libya or Syria or wherever else, but because, frankly, 90% of the Iranian people support a different regime in government.
So, Greg, do you see a civil war starting? How could that happen when the people lack guns? About 1 million IRGC members have all the weapons.
I think there's a likelihood that IRGC members, especially those who are conscripts, I wouldn't put it at about 1 million. I put it closer to 125,000, with another 450,000 in the Artesh, or the Iranian regular army, are frankly looking to see who their paymaster is going to be, rather than those that are ideologically motivated to engage in what would be asymmetrical conflict or low-intensity warfare against whatever government's in place. If President Trump plays his cards right, and if the region lends support to him, both the Sunnis, both other Shia countries, secular countries, Israel, the Gulf Arab countries, allow a transition process, you could ostensibly have the same Iranian government devoid of the ideologues moving towards a transition that's both good for the United States, good for the region, and most importantly, good for Iran. But if there is not a political solution to this, which includes the removal of Mojtaba Khamenei and does not include that wide array of those who are interested in having a pluralistic system, then the possibility of civil war increases. So it really just depends on the president plays his cards and, frankly, how the regime reacts to it.
Well, arming the Iranian Kurds, supporting their insurgency into the northwest of the country, is that a good idea, bad idea? How effective might that be?
I think it's a very good idea, especially if you're trying to create a pocket of Iranian Kurds or just the Iranian opposition to be able to be active on Iranian territory. But the Iranian army and the Iranian government has made it very clear. If the Kurds are to be active using Iraqi forward operating bases to launch operations into Iran itself, the Iranians will retaliate against Iraqi Kurds. So even if they have the intent to try to go into Iranian territory, I don't know if the Talabani and Barzani factions of the Iraqi Kurdish government governing in Erbil and those 3 provinces in the north of the country will allow them to do so. Especially, they're not just worrying about the Iranians, they would be worried about the Turkish army as well.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that also has to be considered is that when the Iranians that are when the Iranian Kurds that are currently present inside Iran right now are perhaps armed by U.S. airdrops, or perhaps given humanitarian aid, or given the arms and the tools necessary to be able to launch this organically from within Iranian territory, that would be a different solution. So I don't see Iranian Kurds in Iraq right now using that territory as a base to launch an insurrection in Iran. I see it happening from cells that have, over the past few months, been moving their way into Kermanshah, into Tabriz, into other areas in the northwest of the country, and then it's sort of spiraling up from there, but not an invasion. This is more like something sort of popping off if the Iranian government starts to lose control in those areas.
Okay, a lot to keep an eye on. Thank you, Greg, for giving us a lot of food for thought. Greg Roman, Middle East Forum, thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.